Okay, everybody, I really appreciate you being here. I'll record this. I'll share this after. I am doing this because, as you just mentioned, Dan, there is a lot of misinformation or lack of knowledge around donor advised funds. And US market is much larger than the Canadian market. And there's some really incredible movement in the DAF space in Canada. And being a charity, I want to educate my donors, but I also wanted to bring in other people who may be confused about how donor advised funds work. And I learned about this like 2 years ago or a year ago. And then I was with GiveWise. Thank you for being here. And then I reached out to Adam, and we've been having a lot of discussions back and forth. And I said, hey, you know about donor advised. I really like the way you work, and would you be willing to do this webinar with me? So he said yes, and so that's why we're here. So I really want to thank you, Adam, and we're gonna lead this with a fireside chat, meaning that I'm going to ask Adam a bunch of questions, and he's going to give us the answers. But if you have anything to input or you have something that you're confused about, don't wait till the end. We want to make this a safe space for everybody to ask your questions and get your answers. So at the end of the day, you're not leaving here confused as you came in. You're leaving here empowered and insightful and ready to make change. Okay, is that good for everybody? Adam, do you want to give us a little bit of your introduction, and then I will get ready in the background.
Sounds good. Well, hello, everybody. For those of you on the call who don't know me, my name is Adam Malcolm. I'm a consultant over at IG Wealth Management in Toronto. And the best kind of way of describing what I do in my work is I help people go from being successful to being generous. A little bit of a longer way of explaining that is I typically work with what I like to call executives who care, social purpose business owners, and philanthropic families, really around strategies for their wealth that hits three key areas, which is being generous to themselves, being generous to the people that they love, and then most applicable today, being generous to their community. Fun fact, as you'll probably see from the background in this room, this is actually my second career. My first career for the majority of my 20s is I was an aspiring opera singer and an actor. And so I have quite a space in my heart, especially for arts and culture. Sit on a number of nonprofit boards, including the Toronto Mendelssohn Choir, Galleries Ontario, and the Canadian Arts Song Project. And yeah, it's one of the things that I describe, this is not my line, I'm taking it from a great guy named Michael Todd, who Dan and I both know quite well. Donor advised funds are kind of like the best kept secret in philanthropy, it feels, even though that they've been around for a number of decades now. So I'm excited to get into it today and answer some questions and maybe field some new ones from the crowd.
You know what? I might take a pause and starting with the questions. Since we're a small group, I'd love to go around and introduce yourself. Tell us why you're here, what you're interested in learning, or if you know about them. Just, take a minute or so, and I'll start with my left top. Dan, go ahead.
Dan, me? I am Dan Drucker. I'm the founder and facilitator of Philanthropy Fuel. It's just a small little business I've started last year to help nonprofits. I'm especially focusing on helping them establish corporate partnerships and things like that. And a member of the nonprofit Hive and an ambassador. That's how I met Mina. Also was incredibly interested in cameras for girls as both a girl dad and an amateur photographer. But I joined tonight because I think DAFs are becoming such a bigger part of the nonprofit, structure here in the U.S. And like I said, there's a lot of nonprofits struggling to understand how to deal with them. But I think there's some big advantages in that, at least here in the US with the rules, timing doesn't matter. You get credit as soon as you put your money in the DAF, you get your tax credit. So the timing of the grant doesn't matter. So nonprofits have an opportunity to stay away from the noisy like year-end push and things like that and reach out to DAF owners at different times, kind of off cycle, to get some attention and support, and also have an opportunity to educate. And I'm not sure if the rules are the same in Canada as far as DAFs, that there is no regulations on when that money needs to be granted. I assume at some point in the future that's going to change because it seems insane to me, but here we are. So that was my interest in joining tonight.
Thank you. Chris, go ahead. Oh, were you late? I was just saying, tell us who you are, why you're here, what you want to learn, or if you know about DAFs already.
Oh,
Anything you want to
hi.
share?
Hi. Sorry, I just walked back into the room.
Oh, sorry about that.
It's okay. My dog needed me. And I think as fellow dog lovers know who the priority is at all times. Um, so I am a board member at C5. We support the youth with outdoor activities and doing networking with local organizations and build confidence is a really amazing organization. And I help with marketing. And I have not heard about the your program. I came to support Amina. We are both in the nonprofit hive. We're both ambassadors, and she's absolutely amazing. And when she told me about today's webinar, I'm like, I'm going to be here because if she's part of something, it has to be great.
Oh,
So,
you're awesome. Thank you. I'll pay you later. Is that here?
Oh, you can pay me now.
Okay.
No, I'm a friend of Adam's and a new friend of Amina's as well. I coach founders and entrepreneurs who struggle for purpose and meaning in their lives, having built big successful companies, but now not sure quite what to do with themselves. So I decided to spend more of my time in helping them figure out how to have a much bigger impact in their communities. And this is part of me trying to figure out where the best place is for them to inject their capital and their time and their energy. One of the things I'm working on is actually a documentary called Humanity versus Capitalism. It's about the good news stories that are happening around the world where we're using the tools of capitalism to uplift standards of living and things like that. Sort of the stories we never hear about in the normal media. And I'm really curious about how DAFs and tools like this can work because I think the more people that know about this, the better. So I'd like to add my voice to yours in sharing this kind of information with people.
Thank you. Dan. Are you able to the mute button?
Sorry, did you say my name? I didn't.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. Sorry.
Okay. No, that's the problem with having a one-syllable name sometimes. That's why my mom calls me Daniel when she wants me to pay
Oh,
attention,
okay.
even at over 50 years old. So yeah, thanks, Amina, for putting this on. And about 8 years ago, was introduced to the idea of donor advised funds, DAFs, by a mentor, a financial advisor mentor in mine and my wife's life. And we had run a successful, it was very successful financially, boutique home building business out here in British Columbia, and was looking for solutions. And everything about donor advised funds made sense to us when it was explained to us, except that 8 years ago, most donor advised funds had very high barriers to entry in terms of high minimums to get started. A lot more, I guess I would say, boundaries in all aspects of the donor advised funds in terms of getting the money out to charities. And then 6 years ago, Tammy and I were offered an opportunity to help a group. A fellow out of near Vancouver had an idea to democratize the donor advised fund, to make it far more accessible to the general public by utilizing software. And so we launched on a journey part-time back then. Actually, it went from volunteer to part-time consulting to now we are all in, to the point where I would call myself a complete DAF geek. Mike, Todd, and I laugh by the time we're into hour 2 or 3 of our conversations about all the things that are coming for DAFs, all of the things that people can do creatively with donor advised funds. We realize, okay, 99.99% of the conversation would have fallen asleep by now, but we're all jazzed up. So I'm thankful for what you're doing here, Amina. You are on the leading edge of charities taking a proactive stance and some DAFs have given DAFs a bad name because they aren't the greatest, haven't been the greatest to deal with from the charity side. They've black boxed information before and that kind of thing. So kudos to you for getting this going and getting the conversation going. And I've recently met Adam, but I've been following. Adam, you have such an amazing way of explaining DAFs, and I love your posts. I always look forward to your LinkedIn posts, your videos, and your text explanations. So I love the community that you're building and how you are really pushing to grow generosity in Canada. So appreciate you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Ali Marshall? I'm not
Ali did mention
sure.
in the chat she had a situation she was dealing with. So I
Yep,
would.
that's right. Janine, are you able to come off mute?
Yes, hi. I'm Janine Ayoub. I have co-founded an organization called DM Services to help nonprofits and businesses with purpose to grow impact. So we do a lot from fundraising to content marketing, videos, etc. I have met Amina and Adam in person, both of them. And I really admire what you both do separately. I'm very interested in hearing how you will interact together in today's session. I have some of my clients who have DAFs who have received from donor advised funds earlier, and I'm curious to know more to be able to help them better eventually. And what else? Thank you for hosting.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Helen?
Well, I have pretty well most of my life. I was raised to support the community and help the community and raise my kids. They're Adam with the same philosophy and approach to life. And with the charitable donations, giving numerous local, international, etc. And Adam has recently opened a family foundation. And we talked about my becoming involved in looking at more strategically planning my givings. And so he's talked about DAFs and whatever. So I thought, okay, I'd come on, and it's more of an education side for me.
Wonderful. You're welcome. Thank you. Barinder?
Hi, so I don't know anything about DAFs. I received an email from Adam and I thought, oh, this looks interesting. I wouldn't mind learning more. My whole career has been in nonprofits. I have sat on several nonprofit boards as well. And giving back to the community is a really, really important pillar for myself and my family.
Thank you. Well, you're welcome. Kishan? I know you. Oh, you can hear and you can speak. Good.
Yeah,
you
I can speak.
Working.
So
Thank you.
sorry about the video.
No, that's okay.
First of all, thanks, Adam, for inviting me. Just a quick bit about myself and hopefully what I can get out of this. I'm a recently retired partner from PricewaterhouseCoopers Canada. Spent over 30 years in consulting, and having taken some time off last year, I am now trying to get involved. From a board perspective on a few not-for-profit charities close to the GTA Toronto area where I live. And my purpose and focus for the next few years upcoming is going to be giving back to society as much as I can. And part of that is obviously fundraising. Having run into Adam at a potential board opportunity I'm looking at, and looking at what DAFs are, definitely piqued my interest. So, I'm just trying to get as much information as I can to firstly educate myself, and secondly, how can I turn that education and probably networks like this and my understanding of DAFs as to how it can help organizations that I'm looking to give back through in a voluntary capacity. So looking forward to the session.
Thank you. Welcome. And Daniel.
Yes, hi there. Sorry about that. I'm actually still in line to vote. I thought I'd be done earlier. But so my name is Daniel Francavilla. I'm currently the founder of company called the Good Growth Company, and we provide training and upskilling for nonprofits as well as some consulting. I exited from my marketing agency of about 11 years at the end of last year. And so I'm focused on teaching, teach at a couple different colleges and universities here in Toronto, and love working with nonprofits. So I'm super interested in anything to do with different ways of giving. And I've been following Adam's content for a while. And my advisor at IG Wealth Management also referred me to Adam after I already knew him. So I thought, okay, I have to be here. So yeah, thanks everyone.
Welcome. And I think Ali, you're back. So do you want to briefly share who you are and why you're here?
Yes, thank you so much. And sorry about that. I'll look forward to checking out the recording to hear about everybody. I'm Ali. I'm based in Calgary, Alberta. And I'm here because I met Adam through LinkedIn, which I think was through Paul Nazareth. And I'm offering a new playbook for higher performing nonprofit governance. And that's a little bit disruptive because we know governance is kind of rigid and everybody's been taught a certain way. And even if it's not working very well, it's hard to shift those systems. So that's where I've been connecting with more fund development professionals who are seeing the strategic issues that social impact boards really need to wrap their arms around. So getting a little bit more in touch there with those amazing change makers who see the strategic issues and risks that we need our boards to rise up and rapidly confront.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everybody for being here. So without further ado, are you ready, Adam?
I'm as ready as I'll ever be.
All right. So let's start with the basics. Some people know what it is and some people don't. What exactly is a donor advised fund and why is it considered the best kept secret in philanthropy?
So you guys can basically pack up and go home after I say this. All you really need to remember, if you don't remember anything else from today, is think of a donor advised fund as the following: an investment account and a giving account smashed together. Everything else we'll get into, there's details and things like that, but that's the way to think of it and approach it. And the way that I think of and discuss donor advised funds with clients is, sometimes you talk about it, it's like a more manageable version of a private foundation, much easier to get into, much lower costs, way less administration. You don't need a board of directors, that sort of thing. But effectively, it's a form of your net worth that is not something you use for yourself or for your family, but as part of your social capital. So that's the very simple version of it. The way that they actually function in the details is that you will have a larger public foundation that administers this. So this may be a public foundation that is like a community foundation, as an example. For those of us out of Toronto, we have the Toronto Foundation, Vancouver Foundation. You'll probably find a community foundation in pretty much every major city of where you are. Not 100% sure if this works this way in the States, but I wouldn't be surprised if it did. And then underneath that, the DAF is basically like an account that is in that. So as the donor or donor advisor, if you will, I can take some of my money and I can put it into this DAF in my name. Now, when I do that, that is when I'm effectively donating money to charity as far as the Canada Revenue Agency is considered. I won't speak for the International Revenue Service, but from what Dan said, it sounds like it's a very similar thing south of the border. As soon as that happens, you get a tax receipt. And then when that money sits in there, it can be invested. So it can stay in cash, just like, if you had a RRSP or TFSA or something at the bank. It can be invested into an investment portfolio. And this is where things get really interesting, because for philanthropic clients, a lot of times, this is our first experience in what's called impact investing or sustainable investing, is using this particular capital in a way that's also aligned with our values. And then year after year, you dole out the money in terms of grants. So in Canada, there is a minimum generally of a 5% disbursement quota. Now, to get just a little bit more complicated, it doesn't always have to work exactly that way, because technically the 5% is for the entire foundation that administers every DAF. So if you have, one very wealthy individual who is granting far more than 5%, and then you have a bunch of smaller ones, and that technically covers the entire balance of everybody, legally, nobody else technically has to grant. But one of the things that Dan very correctly pointed to is that if we're using a DAF as a way of frankly just trying to shelter money but not actually having charitable intent, this, in my opinion, is a bad thing. And you should know that the IRS right now, I should say the IRS before January 1st, I don't know if it's changed with the new administration, had been talking about, well, should we be looking at things differently this way? Should we be looking at actually how these DAFs are managed, and if they are managed with true charitable intent? The CRA has been in not as advanced discussions, but it has been brought up to them in terms of these kind of things. When I speak to DAF providers, when I first met Dan, one of the very first questions I have for them is, what is your disbursement quota? And by the way, has there ever been a situation where that hasn't been honored, and what steps have you taken in that situation? The answers that they give me are usually very telling on how they are. And although I'm not associated directly with Dan, I should tell you that his answer was very good. It was that, our clients, we've never really come across that. The clients are actually honoring that sort of thing. So that's the 101s, like very high level of what a donor advised fund is. Investment account, giving account, smash it together. Very powerful, both financial planning and philanthropic planning vehicle.
Thank you. Am I off? Yeah. Okay, that's great. That's a great overview. But can you walk us through an example, a real life example, one of your clients or somebody who used a DAF to maximize their tax benefits, because that's what it is. It's a tax benefit vehicle, while also making an impact. So they're tax benefits, but they're making charitable giving. And how does this affect their capital gains though? Because we think about capital gains when it comes to real estate investing, but not necessarily charitable giving or even putting our money into one of these funds. So we need to be aware of that as well, I think.
Yes, actually, Keyshawn, I see your question in the chat. I'm going to come back to that one just a little later on. So the interesting thing actually, and I'm going to just slightly challenge that. In my opinion, the strongest planning is not to use this necessarily as a leading with a tax planning vehicle, but leading as a general financial planning and philanthropic planning vehicle. I always describe the tax benefits, and this is true of all charitable donations, not just DAFs. It's the spoonful of sugar. It is not the medicine itself. And so I'll tell you what this means with an example with one of our clients named Matt. So Matt, young executive, he's about 28 years old, but already very philanthropic. And him and his family all shared around one particular cause, which was ALS Canada. Unfortunately, the reason for that is because his father had passed away from ALS. So they had this shared reason to give. And he was usually giving something to the tune of 4 to occasionally low 5 figures a year. But as you can kind of hear in that, it was ad hoc, right? If there was a fundraiser that was going on, he was actually a very prolific fundraiser for somebody who wasn't a professional, by the way. There might be several thousand there, or if he was asked, there might be several thousand there, or at the end of the year when it came tax planning time, there might be kind of some time to squeeze in a donation there type thing. But there wasn't a consistent strategy around it. And the second part about it, think about it this way. If you're trying to plan for your retirement and you're only putting your money in a checking account, how successful do you think that you'll be? You're probably gonna have to save a lot of money, and it's gonna be pretty inefficient because it won't necessarily grow in a way. So with Matt, one of the things that we suggested setting up a family foundation by way of a DAF. So the family there is very key because we have multiple generations of people who are all interested in a shared cause. They can all contribute to this DAF, all receive their own tax benefits, etc., and then all kind of get together at the end of the year and decide as a family, who do we want to grant to? And that's some of the most powerful giving that I see is when this becomes effectively what's the word, like a family reunion almost in disguise, kind of as a DAF planning meeting. But more importantly, what it did is it allowed us to start talking about his philanthropic plan in more structured ways, is to say, okay, well, you know what, if you give in this way and you give generally what you were planning and you actually stick with it, which is the important thing, you actually stick with it, we projected he'd make an impact of about 300,000 for the rest of his life, between 28 and 90. And then we said, well, if you use a DAF and we commit to this and we find this and we put it into your financial plan as an important part, as important as all of the other goals that we have, and we use the DAF and it grows in the market as well, that ended up changing to about 2.2 million by 90. We then
What's
took
the
it.
difference though? Because how are you investing that money differently that it grows exponentially?
Well, one is that it is in fact invested. So in the first scenario, it was just everything was a straight donation every year. It was only through cash.
I was a child. Okay, so it wasn't a family foundation, so I missed that.
Yeah, and so the second one, you kind of have growth. And now here's an interesting thing that if you're reading between lines, you say, well, Adam, wouldn't that mean that if you say 5% disbursement, you know, he's actually going to be giving less right away? And the answer is, in this case, it was correct. The first few years, it would be lower. And then after about a decade, the disbursement amount equaled basically what he was doing before and then continued to grow from there. So on one hand, this is where I hear often charities who don't like DAFs say this is supplanting money that folks might otherwise give to charity. In my experience, usually not, because usually it's more of a financial planning vehicle. But also, you know, there's no reason why he can't still do the fundraiser. There's no reason why he can't still give in other ways. And making that more a structured part of his plan, it opened up discussions for that. The other thing that we did, which was interesting, is in the discussion of his estate planning, we were discussing using some life insurance strategies, just based on kind of where he was with the other elements of his plan. And so we said, well, what are your thoughts on this? Would you want your impact to basically die with you? And the answer was no. And so we designed to say, okay, well, if we use part of this insurance strategy and have a certain portion of that death benefit, you know, some goes to your kids down the line, some goes into the DAF. It basically had an influx of capital, and it turned that 300,000 turned to 2.2 million, that 2.2 million turned to 6 million. And we weren't doing this by dramatically saying, hey, we're just going to like 10 times your donations out of your pocket every day, but rather we were going to make sure this was a committed part of your plan. Will it end up being exactly 6.6 million down the line? Almost certainly not, because that's 60 years from now. But the main thing is that we're thinking of these exponential ways, we're thinking of these strategic ways to actually do things rather than be more reaction based.
And it becomes generational.
And it becomes generational is the other thing, right?
So how come, just a follow-up question, but how come there are so many family foundations or so many foundations out there that do not put it under a DAF? Because I went to one of my donors last 2 weeks ago. I invited, they have a family foundation. I said, hey, we're doing this. Would you like to learn? No, he goes, nope, not for us. And he didn't give me the reason why. But he just said, no, we investigated and it wasn't for us. So I'm not sure if you know that, but it can, when we're trying to push DAF and educate people on the benefits of starting a DAF, why are not more foundations going under a DAF?
Yeah, so one of the interesting things, at least in Canada, is there is actually an influx of private foundation money going towards DAFs. So that particular example, I'm not sure what their specific reasons are. I can assume a few that might be true. One is that a private foundation is more complex, but it's also a bigger thing generally, right? You've got a board of directors, right? It's this, big entity, it's its own thing. Some people might want that. Right? One great example with philanthropic families is it's not uncommon for the administration of the family foundation to be one of the Gen 2 or Gen 3, as we call them, the children or the grandchildren. So much so there's actually a stereotype that there's, the son that can never really kind of find his way in the world. Well, maybe he manages the family foundation in some way. That's anecdotal, but you hear that more often than not with like very wealthy families. So they might have investigated it and thought that, you know what, actually collapsing this is just too trouble than it's worth. It may be just too entrenched in their culture. But I should also say that for all intents and purposes, a private foundation and a DAF, from a charity's perspective, are very similar. In fact, in Canada, actually, the private foundations, and this is one thing that sometimes charities come to me and tell me I'm frustrated with this. You can look up private foundations in the Charities Directorate. They all exist there. They have to. DAFs are by their nature not, because remember that overarching foundation, that one will be listed. Toronto Foundation will be listed, but all the individuals will not. And sometimes the anonymity of that is actually what donors want. And that is something that, on the charities side, I think it can be frustrating because we always want to give people credit, and we know that we don't want to solicit them. Sometimes people might feel that they might be solicited. I am really in the belief that that is often more of a communications thing. Sometimes there's a breakdown. I've heard from some of my friends in charity that, annual campaign and how they approach fundraising is very different, of course, than how planned giving approaches fundraising. So I understand that, but that is one of the things to note in there. It's a little kind of beyond the scope of the question, but you can be completely anonymous if you want with your DAF.
Okay, let's take some of these questions if we can.
Sure.
So Kishan said, in Canada, do DAFs have CDIC coverage or protection?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things that I will say is that there's no reason why they wouldn't, because at the end of the day, the investments are still going to need to be administered by some sort of trustee or financial company, whether it's a bank, whether it is like a wealth management company. So one of the things that I would research in this case, Kishan, is, well, who is actually doing who's the trustee here, or who is the one that is actually managing the money? Because if they're CDIC insured, which it probably would be in this case, then I would imagine that the money would be. Now, keep in mind, though, that the CDIC coverage is only to bank balances. So if you are having your money invested in a stock or mutual fund or ETF portfolio, this might be actually under the rules of, say, the CIRO, or previously MFDA. So I won't get too into the weeds about that, but that would be, I wouldn't see any reason why they wouldn't be. And I don't think there's any reality in which a foundation is actually managing their own money in-house. At least not that I've come across. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Zahir, I'm trying to understand your question, so maybe you should ask it instead of me trying to butcher it.
Sure. I was just curious, can it be used by a business to direct a certain percentage of their revenue and net income to this? And then secondly was a community of individuals, not a family. So is there some sort of rule around who can pull this together to do it?
That's a great question.
Great question.
There absolutely a business could do this. Now, the interesting thing about a DAF compared to a private foundation, I don't want to speak too out of my bounds because I'm not a charities lawyer. But one of the big concerns of if you have a foundation that's run by a business is how separate are those entities? Well, a DAF is always run by a completely unrelated public foundation of some kind. So it seems to me that there would be a very clear delineated line that there is no commingling here of benefit, that the business owners are not going to get undue benefit. They're not going to, board members, again, not applicable, won't have undue benefit. One thing to keep in mind, though, for at least Canadian incorporated business owners, the way that a donation works for a corporation is different than an individual. Individual gets a tax receipt, a non-refundable tax receipt, whereas a corporation gets a deduction. So one of the questions we go through with business owners is, well, does it make more sense to donate from your personal hands or your corporate hands? And the answer is not cut and dry. It's really individual situation. I could tell you one of the interesting things is if you have a holding corporation, especially with like a very, say you bought a stock that really appreciated significantly in value. and selling it would trigger a significant capital gain, it might make sense to actually donate that security, what we call in kind, into a DAF. And what this does is, you remember back in the day, actually, I hope nobody remembers this because you'd have to be alive in like the 30s, where stocks were printed on, physical certificates. In kind is almost, you just take the physical certificate and you take where it says Adam Malcolm and you wipe it out and you put Malcolm Family Foundation. So you don't actually sell anything. You were literally just changing hands of ownership. And the benefits of that is that if it's publicly traded, it waives the capital gain entirely. So it leads to a whole realm of planning that's really interesting in terms of, okay, well, you know what? We might want to decide to move some of this stock that, maybe we don't even need for our personal use or our family use into this social capital vehicle here. And by the way, it might also be something that's really beneficial to, as a business owner, as an example, maybe generate tax-free dividends going forward. There's situations where that's very common. I hope that didn't get a little too in the weeds.
That's okay. So let's ask a quick follow-up on that one. The insurance piece as well, is that something that would fit with the business side as well? If there's an insurance policy on key risk or things like that are in there, that some portion of the death benefit or things like that could be directed to a foundation?
There shouldn't be any reason I can think as to why not. One of the interesting things about business owners is as you get to selling the business, those insurance policies often become superfluous. A lot of times business owners just have term insurance for that, in which case, there's nothing really to worry about. You generally cancel it. But if they did have a permanent insurance policy with a cash surrender value, as I call it, like some kind of value to it, you can donate that too. So this is not a business owner example, but
it's the
individual example that I'm about to give you. Clients we're putting together a philanthropic plan for them. And part of what they're doing is selling some real estate that will give them a significant amount of cash in the near future. And the plan as they had it was, we'll just take some of those proceeds, donate to charity. Maybe we'll start a DAF. Maybe we'll kind of give it directly, whatever it might be. One of the things we noticed is that the husband, being an extremely smart individual, had a number of permanent insurance policies that he bought back in the 80s. And, at the time, even though they were small, they've built themselves up to probably about $250,000 worth of cash surrender value. But the interesting thing is, one, he's a man, and two, he's 10 years older than his wife. So if we're talking about final estate planning for their children, those insurance policies might not actually be all that relevant. So one of the things we're looking at right now is, does it make sense to actually donate the insurance policies and then keep the cash from the sale of the real estate for retirement, for estate planning? So again, there's no one size fits all, but it's really about looking at all of the different pieces of the puzzle.
Oops.
Uh-oh.
We'll be back.
We'll be back. Oh, am I still here?
Yeah.
Okay. I have some camera issues, but as long as you can hear me, I'll finish my point and then I'll reboot my camera. Basically looking at all the pieces of the puzzle and arranging them in the way that makes the most sense to basically the goals and the impact that we want. I also, by the way, notice I didn't answer the second part of your question. Anybody can donate to a DAF. Anybody at all. So, Zahir, if you set up a DAF, I could donate to it. You could donate to it. Some guy on the street that you solicit for donations, he could donate to it. We'd all get the tax benefits ourselves, but the donor advisor, which in this case presumably is you, is the one that would ultimately get the decision on where the money is granted to. So that's why a lot of times you see it as a family thing, because there's a lot of trust in there. Just know that, if you're going to do it more as a community type thing, as a pooling type thing, that people just don't think that they're actually, unless you want to set it up as some kind of democratic DAF, which would be fantastic, but you might not want to do that. That they just don't kind of have that idea. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
That would lead
Very
to
helpful.
Dan's point of a giving circle. Many giving circles are using DAFs as a vehicle because then they can democratically choose who they want to donate to. Dan asks, where's the line drawn for a nonprofit? I can give this in terms of giving financial advice to donors or prospects, i.e. directing them to open a DAF, explaining how it works, etc. So can I answer that one?
Absolutely.
So I'm a charity, and this is why I'm doing this with a financial advisor, because it's arm's length and I'm not the one giving advice. And I'm not stating to you, if you're interested in supporting Cameras for Girls, oh, go and set up a DAF and go and do this and go do, no, we can't legally do any of that because we're not financial advisors. We're, executive directors or fundraisers or whatever we are. And I know in Canada that we could get our hands slapped. I'm not sure what it is like in the US, but I think there's a line that you don't cross, because you could give somebody the wrong information. You have no clue what their financial background is. And then, you not only lose trust, but they lose, something more. So yeah, I would say no. I think there's a huge line. You want to add anything?
That sounds about right. Again, obligatory, not a charities lawyer. Don't take this as kind of legal advice here. But that seems like it would be getting into the realm of something that could land you in a bit of hot water. One of the ways that people I've seen are very successful in it is like what we're doing on this, is to have partnerships, with financial advisors. So there's a very successful and very well-known hospital foundation called the Sick Kids Foundation in Toronto, and they have a professional advisor network. That's, financial advisors, lawyers, accountants. And one of the things is, they can go through those relationships if needed. Because at the end of the day, you can talk to a donor about, hey, have you considered securities donations? And have you understand this and that? And as soon as the person goes, oh, that's fantastic. Which of my stocks should I donate? You have to be like, can't do that because I'm not a licensed individual. And then you have to rely on somebody who is, to do so. I can't imagine the States would be any different on that.
Awesome. Okay, so we've gotten a lot of questions out of the way because we've been talking back and forth. So let's talk about logistics. How much do you need to start a DAF? What assets can be contributed, and how do donors manage their fund over time? Yeah.
So the interesting thing on that, and when Dan kind of gave his intro as to the genesis of GiveWise, the minimums for DAFs range all over the place. Some of them are very low, if not effectively zero. Some of them are minimum of 6 figures. So that's an important thing to kind of keep in mind. One of the first things that you want to do in terms of a DAF is to figure out, well, who is the ideal DAF provider for you? So to expand this question a little bit more, there are 3 kind of big buckets. The first bucket are community foundations. So community foundations often, have DAFs and have been doing DAFs for quite a while. Benefits of community foundations as to why you would want to use them. One of the things is that the fees associated with the DAF are usually directly into the charitable intent of the general foundation itself. So that's one thing that may be appealing. Second thing is they often do have, large economies of scale, that they have, large endowments of other monies, and have, say, access and are often leading the charge in terms of things like impact investing. There's that as well. And a lot of times they have other forms of community building and service that, may be very applicable and very relevant to you. So full disclosure, my family foundation is at the Toronto Foundation. I'm not directly associated with them, but one of the things that drew me towards it was the fact that they are constantly running donor education, and they are constantly running workshops and things like that. And I should note, by the way, I could have set my own DAF up under myself and got paid on my own money to manage it. And I actively made the decision not to, because that stuff was that important to me by way of a value. So that's the first one, is community foundations. Second one are financial institutions. So this might be like IG Wealth Management. We have our strategic charitable giving fund as an example. Any of the big banks and the big 5 banks in Canada will have them, and a number of wealth management companies will, as well as, the Fidelity one, interestingly enough, I don't know if it's available in Canada. I should check that. But that's the biggest one no, it's not. Dan's shaking his head. It's the biggest DAF period to my knowledge, and it's in the States. So the thing to note about the financial side is that some of the the benefits on that is that, you know, it could be one-stop shop for where you have your money, right? So if you are always doing everything at the bank and you have it at the bank, that might be something that you want to keep in mind there. Negatives of that is it could also, as much as I would hate to say this, some of the financial institutions view their DAFs more of a product rather than a service. Okay, so I won't name any names in there, but just keep that in mind. And the third bucket in there is independent organizations. Ones, as an example, like GiveWise. And so they range all over the place in how they do things, and each one of them really has their own unique value proposition, if you will. There's a reason to go with one versus another versus another. And what you would probably want to look at is, okay, you know, what are the things that makes them stand out from the crowd, right? Do they have access to investment vehicles or even the ability to hold insurance policies that maybe I can't, you know, with other DAFs as an example? Are they really leading the way in certain other areas? Is their platform easy to use? As we talked about, one of the things that stops people from doing anything is just like, what are the barriers to actually getting things done? So in the States, they have this service called DAF Pay, which has really helped democratize and make it easy for people with DAFs to literally kind of just go in and pay with them. Whereas some DAFs, you know, some DAFs can only grant once a year. Some DAFs granting, it's like you have to do paperwork and it's a whole thing. It's, yeah, that kind of idea. So those are the three buckets that you kind of look at. Each one has its own pros and cons. That's really what you want to look at for the first thing is, you know, who am I looking for? And each one of those will inform some of the other questions that you had there. Yeah.
Side question, what are the fees associated with, you know, either setting up a DAF and running a DAF or you running your own DAF? Like, what's the difference? Because having a financial advisor run is going to be more expensive than, say, setting up a DAF with, you know, on a platform and having it automated or whatever.
I mean, it may or it may not. That's one of the things that you want to take a look at. Generally speaking, the fees are some form of like a management fee as well as an investment fee, right? Investment fees are going to be the same. Just if you have personal investments, somebody needs to manage them. If you have investments inside of a DAF, somebody needs to manage them. But they'll generally have an administration fee that pays for everything from the platform to the people that, you know, help service it, et cetera. That can really vary. And one of the things to note is where that is may also depend on, say, how many assets that you have at that institution as well. Like, one of the benefits is if you have a $10 million, you know, with a financial institution, you may have the power to significantly negotiate that fee for your DAF. If you don't, you might not. So, but generally it is a investment fee and an administration fee, both of which are kind of a percentage of the amount of money inside of the DAF.
Okay, we're getting close, guys. Is everybody still okay? I know we're going a little bit over time, but I just want to get through this, if that's okay. Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so I'm like now keen to get going. What's the first step for someone who's interested in setting up a DAF? And what are the most important things they should consider before moving forward? Because it's not like, oh, I'm going to go and buy a mutual fund today. It's much more involved than that, I should assume.
So the very first thing that you want to do is call your advisor and to chat about how this works in your plan and how it makes sense for the goals, not just the charitable goals that you have, but the other various goals that you have in your life. When I say that, you know, my work is really about helping people be generous to themselves, the people they love, and their community, it has to be in that order. At the end of the day, you never want to kind of put your family or yourself at risk, even if you are really doing the right thing, because you're not going to be able to sustain that impact. So that's the first. That
goes to your values, right? Like your values are equally important, right? Okay.
The second part to think about is terms of like, well, when might make sense. One of the benefits of DAFs is that, you know, if you have a major taxable event coming up in your life, and maybe that is selling a business, selling property, maybe that event is death, which is often, we don't want to talk about it, but is often a very taxable event. Those can be oftentimes where using a DAF as a vehicle is a way to really benefit the plan and then, you know, provide something like that going on. The third question, honestly, you should ask is, do I need a DAF in the first place? Because if really what you want to do is effectively just flow through money and donate today, the idea of a DAF might be superfluous for that particular goal. DAFs are really, in my opinion, best utilized when they're set up as sustainable, ongoing charitable vehicles that you're going to be, no pun intended, investing in for a while. And that's not to be saying that you can't have a DAF that works flow through, where you put money in, you put money out. That can still work. But just kind of keep in mind of what that looks like. Because at the end of the day, if you're looking to make a direct impact today and you know the charity that you want to do it with, and it's a single charity as an example, it might actually just be easier to maybe donate assets to them directly. There are various instances where you might not want to do that as an example. We don't always want to talk about this in nonprofit space, but I will tell you as a professional advisor, I had a client come to me a little while ago, and he has this interesting insurance policy that would pay out various amounts if he died in various ways. And he said, I want to give this to, and then he mentioned a very local grassroots organization of which I was very familiar with. And I had to tell him, as your advisor, you cannot give them that much money directly because they won't be able to manage it. I'm sorry, I'm not giving a thumbs up. That's just Zoom thinking. And as much as we'd love to say, you know, especially those of us who sit on nonprofit boards, hey, that's a problem I'd love to have, we'll figure it out. With this particular organization, like I knew that it was a revolving board that often, you know, didn't have people sit on it for a particular long amount of time. You know, they had never had more than, you know, mid 5 figures of a budget. Leaving them $1 million and hoping that they know what to do with it would be very difficult. So in this case, what I said, well, it might make actually more sense to do is to set up a DAF if he were to pass away and have them be the beneficiary, the sole beneficiary of all the income going forward. And so creating basically a secure ongoing income stream.
So almost like legacy giving in a way.
Almost like legacy. Is that potentially paternalistic? Is that the kind of potential donor situation that we don't want to see? Yes, potentially. But also, like, some of these are the messy conversations that we have to have around these kind of things. And I have to say, like, in this case, in my duty as the advisor, I had to let him know. That might not be what you want to do. And there are a lot of stories of charities who were not able to properly manage large gifts, and the impact ended up, you know, not really happening in the way that the donor expected.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So we talked about value, and I think the last question I have is, can you explain the alternative minimum tax and how that affects high net worth individuals?
Yeah. Okay. How much time you guys got?
Dan's laughing, but yeah. You
So
asked me to put that on the question. So
all you need to know about this is, if you think alternative minimum tax is going to affect you, talk with your accountant. Alternative minimum tax is basically, when you file your taxes, what they actually do is they run 2 tax regimes in Canada. They run your regular income tax. And then back in the 80s, they realized that there were a bunch of extremely wealthy individuals who, through a variety of financial instruments, they felt like they were kind of actually evading taxes rather than avoiding taxes. And so they had introduced this second thing called alternative minimum tax. And what it does is it goes through a series of types of ways that wealthy individuals often pay themselves, capital gains, dividends, etc. And it runs 2 calculations. And it says, whichever one comes out on top, that's the tax you pay. If your regular tax is going to be higher, you pay your regular tax. If your alternative minimum tax is going to be higher, you pay your alternative minimum tax. This was a big topic about a year and a half ago in charity land, because there was discussion about changing the alternative minimum tax. And one of the discussions was that it would really mute the power of large donations in particular. Again, not to get too nuanced, but it would say if you were going to do one of these in-kind donations, you wouldn't necessarily be able to waive the capital gains entirely. And also you wouldn't necessarily get the expected donation receipt in full. The government said that this would likely affect something to the tune of, 14 individuals a year. So it gives you kind of an idea on that. I'm not 100% sure if those are the actualities of who it might affect. One of the things to note about alternative minimum tax is if you are subject to it in a single year, you can recoup it in the coming years as long as you don't continue to be subject to it. So if you have like a year where you sell a huge piece of capital property and you're subject to it, as long as you have income in the next few years, that makes sense. And again, this is where I'm not an accountant, so I'm not going to really speak further than this. It may not be all that significant of it. All I would say is, as always, talk to your tax advisor, your accountant, before you make major decisions and like big donations like this, just to see if it would apply. Doesn't necessarily mean it would kill the gift, but it's something that you would need to know about. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Those are my questions. Anybody have last questions before we hand it over to Dan to show us how GiveWise works for 2 minutes and then we're off? Everybody's good? All right, Dan, you want to take over? You can share your screen if you want, so you can give us a quick overview and then before we say goodbye.
Oh, okay, thanks. I wasn't prepared for sharing my screen, but I will, here, I will go.
I can show them mine if you want.
Sure, yeah. Here, what I wanted to state rather, yeah, like, of course, we're proud of our technology. We're an independent technology-based donor-advised fund. So something. Oh, have I frozen?
Nope, you're there.
Okay. Something that I would have to say is I'm trying to share here. Something
I'll
that
stop
I
sharing.
would
Go
have.
ahead.
All right. Can you see?
I can see.
Okay. Here, let's see here. Oh boy, we use Teams normally, so I haven't used
Oh, I see. Okay.
I haven't used Zoom to
Zoom.
share for a while. But essentially what you can see here is this doesn't look like a financial institution's screen. So something that we've really wanted to explain is the idea of we're not trying to convince people to be more generous. What we're trying to do as a donor advised fund is to help them to remove barriers. And something that makes GiveWise a little different is because we have no minimums. Adam, I absolutely agree with you that sometimes people will ask us, why don't I just give to my charities directly? Or the charities will come to us and say, why would my donors want to use a donor advised fund when, you know what, it's just easy for them to give straight from my website on our charity's website. GiveWise is a convenience factor as well. So being an fully digital online DAF, what happens now is when we started this, I started a GiveWise account, and now I have a chronicled history of my giving for the last 6 years centralized into one spot. My kids, who were teenagers at the time and are now young adults, they were giving their few dollars into their account. Imagine now, like I'm over 50. I would love it if I had a 20-year history and I could go back to looking at when I was just out of college, out of university, and just starting my own first little business and stuff. Like if I would have, I can't remember how much I gave, but boy, it would be nice to have a chronicled history. So for free, that's one aspect. GiveWise has that convenience factor, and it's one single tax receipt. And so that's another convenience factor. If you give to a couple of charities, like my wife and I, part of why we did this, we were always givers, and I had a color-coded spreadsheet. This donation tax receipt came via the post. This donation tax receipt came as an email right when I did the donation. This one is supposed to come as an email somewhere in February when all the charities issue their tax receipts. Now, for 6 years, I haven't had to search for any tax receipts. I hand one PDF to my accountant. So there's that aspect of it. So it's not just an investment vehicle, which I think it's most powerfully used when people do invest their charitable funds and do that kind of strategic giving in terms of a built-up plan of using their wealth as it grows to help community wealth as their wealth grows, right? So that's something that we really love. I would say one of our biggest messages to charities is that what we've seen is the charities that take a proactive approach to understanding DAFs, knowing what they do, and knowing the difference between the different types of DAFs. So why would I promote DAFs on my website and say I'm open, not even a particular DAF, but at least put a line in the donation button or the donation screen to say, be the, like if we are open for business with your DAF money as a donor, and then that way, what they're saying is they're releasing the donor to say, okay, well, it has made the most sense for my strategic giving plan to use a donor advised fund, but and my charity supports that. They understand me as a donor, why I wanted to use a DAF, and they are now saying we want to work with DAFs. That being said, a charity, if they want to recommend certain DAFs, it's good for the charities to know which DAFs actually really work with charities. We at GiveWise love to serve the charities with donor data, with easy access to a charity portal. And now we're doing a button that isn't quite DAF Pay because there's 1,200 DAFs in the US. So DAF Pay as a button down there, it works. There are so few DAFs. More what we're trying to do is say to charities, the day is over when you used to have like just cash and checks coming in. Now there's 18 different ways and types of assets that people want to give. We as GiveWise don't want charities to have to be financial transaction wizards and understand how to accept gifts of cryptocurrency, how to accept gifts of real estate. We will do all that heavy work for you as a charity so that you receive cash, essentially an EFT, electronic cash. So to charities, we say, be proactive, learn about DAFs, and then the next thing, and we're finding that charities that do that are engaging their donors at a different level now too. And now some charities are having us come in and we call it generosity exchange. And we're going to be doing a bunch of these in spring where it's donor education nights for charities to bring their donors of any capacity so that they can help understand, because even just somebody who puts some money in, let's say they put a few $1,000s in Apple 14 years ago. Well, now that's worth $46,000, and they could give direct a portion of that. They could give, 10 shares of Apple, and that costs them a heck of a lot less. They get to bypass the capital gain. So we get to educate donors about all the different strategies. And so that's what's fun for GiveWise is like that, we're really helping the charities that way.
Awesome.
I've gone
So
way past
we're a
my
little bit
2
over time, yeah.
Yeah.
But thanks so much for sharing that. And if you guys want to reach out to Dan, we're I'm sure he'd love to talk about that. And maybe Dan, when I get back from Uganda, we'll do one of those events in the spring.
That would be great.
Thank you all.
Zahir, I just want to make sure we connect because I have a couple of contacts for you in the impact investment space. So sorry.
Terrific. Thank you. I've connected with you on LinkedIn. We absolutely need to talk. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for coming tonight. I hope this was helpful to you. I'll be sharing this through my newsletter and also on socials. I'll tag you guys, and I really appreciate it. Have a great night. Thanks again, Adam.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
You've been very helpful. Take care.
Good night.
Take care.
Good night.